Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to talk today about the ethics of artificial intelligence. My name is MADAI, and I have a background in medicine, neuroscience, AI, and ethics. I'm a senior AI researcher at Charité Berlin, and at the same time I'm also Chief Scientific Officer of AI for Medicine, which is a company that focuses on AI-based data analytics. So the topic is ethics of AI. So let's talk first about what actually ethics are and how it relates to morality. Let's begin with morality. Morality is something deeply personal, but at the same time it is something that everybody sees as generally applicable. Because morality is really about what we see as right or wrong. And we really like to be in contact with people and to be surrounded with people that share these views. What could moral views be? It could be things like that you want people to tell the truth, that they keep their promises, that they treat others like they want to be treated, or that they are trustworthy. But it's also what you think about concepts. For example, is abortion right or wrong? Animal testing, meat consumption, or human cloning? But how do we get from here to ethics? Let's assume a very, very simple conversation. He says, I'm against animal testing. I think it's immoral. And she will ask a very, very simple question, and that is, why? And this is actually what ethics is about, just on a little bit of a higher level. Ethics is the part of philosophy which analyzes, systematizes, and questions morality, and develops frameworks to decide which morals are the most appropriate in certain situations. Let's look at an example. There is, for example, utilitarianism. It's a quite widespread ethical framework, and in the briefest definition, utilitarianism says the most moral choice is always the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. I'm going to exemplify this. You might have seen this sometime in your life. Very important to say before I tell you what this picture is about, these are thought experiments. They are not supposed to be realistic in the sense that it will happen not that often, that someone will tie 5 people and another person on a track. These are thought experiments just to test ethical frameworks. So this is the famous trolley problem. So there's a trolley going down a certain track, and there are 5 people tied to this track. You are the person at the lever, and the moment you move this lever, the trolley would be diverted and it would roll over only one person who is tied on the other track. According to utilitarianism, the most moral choice would be to divert the trolley, since the greatest good for the greatest number of people is to save more people than one. Other ethical frameworks might come to different conclusions when applying this thought experiment. I want you to remember this trolley problem because we're going to look at something similar later. First, we are going to go to the second part of ethics of AI. I want to quickly talk about what I mean by artificial intelligence in this talk. Because is it that? Absolutely not. And the main reason it's not this is that artificial intelligence is, as you might know, and mainly a buzzword, how it is used today. Artificial intelligence is not intelligent according to human standards. And the main reason is that we do not have today something that is called artificial general intelligence. that could be considered intelligent according to human standards. Our AI is built for very, very narrow and predefined tasks. So the field of AI that is trying to make technology that can do what so far only humans could do has a very important subfield, which is machine learning, meaning we don't need to program the algorithms what they need to learn, what they should learn, but instead we just provide the data, the inputs and the outputs, and the learning process will come up with the resulting model. And a very important subfield, as you probably all know, is deep learning using deeply layered artificial neural nets. And when we talk today about AI, we talk about machine learning mostly, machine learning and deep learning, with their very, very narrow applications. But despite the limitations, as you also well know, we have seen tremendous advances using this technology in the recent years. Self-driving cars, self-flying drones. Probably almost all of you regularly talk to their phones and sometimes even get sensible answers. We get recommendations about which movies to watch, which products to buy, and there have been tremendous advances in computer vision. So very importantly, all the ethical issues that I will touch upon today are ethics of narrow AI. They are not the ethics of artificial general intelligence, which might come sometime in the future. And the first ethical issue that I would like to talk about is the one of AI agency. As with the self-driving car, AI will lead to autonomous decision-making instead of humans. This is what we call AI agency. AI needs to make decisions. And as we have used the trolley problem as a thought experiment, we can use a modern version of it, a related version, which is, so this was a trolley problem, a related version of this, which is this one. Let's assume a self-driving car is on the road. And it has lots of sensors and it measures everything that is happening around it all the time. And let's assume the situation, whatever the reason, that there are suddenly many people on the road. The measurements and calculations show that the car cannot brake in time. So that means it would hit these people on the road. This would not be a problem if the car could just divert to the sidewalk, which is empty. But the thought experiment is different. There is one person on the sidewalk. And there are only two options. The car can divert and hit this one person, or the car can stay on course, hitting many people. And while the driving process is one that has been trained using machine learning, where we don't need to program what has been learned, this cannot be automatically learned from data. This decision is one that needs to be programmed by us into the car. What should the car do in such a situation? And there are more thought experiments like this. This was case A. Case B is a different one. There's someone on the road, the car could divert, but the only way to avoid the collision is to run into an obstacle at the side of the road, potentially endangering the driver or better passenger in a self-driving car. Now, there was only now one person on the road, so you might say, well, one driver, one person. That is simple, but what if there are many people again on the road and only one driver passenger? What should happen now? So if this was a live event, I would actually be able to ask you, but it is not. So I will provide you what happened in one of my last talks when I asked the audience live. So I asked, an autonomous car should save as many lives as possible or protect the driver passengers. So this is the answer that I usually get. Between 60 and 70% say the paradigm should be to save as many lives as possible and not to protect the driver or the passengers. But I will now ask another question. Would you buy a car that would potentially kill you to save other people? And suddenly, it's the other way around. 62%, and also that is consistent with most polls that like this that I did, suddenly answer in the opposite way. So where did the utilitarian approach, that was obviously the basis of the first answer, go within 3 seconds? Now, I didn't come up with this question or with these questions. They were actually published already in 2016 in the journal Science in a work called The Social Dilemma of Autonomous Vehicles, where the authors already then showed that most asked participants in this study were in favor of a utilitarian approach to minimize casualties, had no problem with sacrificing the passengers as long as they were not the passengers. So one of the main ethical issues here is that AI will lead to autonomous decision-making instead of humans. And we need to kind of program morality into this decision-making. But I hope I could just show you it's not very simple to decide which morality it should be, since, as you saw, humans can change their opinion about this within 3 seconds when they suddenly realize that they might be affected. And of course, this question is related to other ethical issues, such as responsibility, but also such as transparency. The second ethical issue of narrow AI that I would like to touch upon is bias. This screenshot is representing a tool that actually Google developed a few years ago that was used to tag objects in photographs. And as you can see, skyscrapers is correct, airplanes is correct, cars is correct, graduation correct, bikes correct. The last one definitely not correct. And this is something that we encounter really in many, many applications that have been built. Another example, and it's another example of Google, but it's not only Google, almost all tools are affected by bias. So this, for example, is from the Turkish language, which I do not speak, but it is very similar to the Hungarian, which I do speak. And both languages share what I'm showing you here. So this was translated by Google, or used to be translated by Google, as "he is a doctor." But Turkish as Hungarian, these languages are not gender specific. The same sentence can also mean "she is a doctor." And fortunately, this has been fixed for many languages, for Turkish as well as for Hungarian a few months ago, so that we see now both potentially correct translations. But why was it that in the past it was only "he is a doctor"? Well, this was very, very old, and you all know it, very, very ingrained gender bias, where in literature or wherever, the assumption is always that he is the doctor and she is the nurse. And actually, when you did the same for nurse, then it was the other way around. And you can also see that we actively need to kind of fight bias to get rid of it, and we need to be aware of it. And this is because, as I mentioned, one of the main characteristics of machine learning is that it is data-driven. So I provide the data with the inputs, with the labels, training process will come up with the model. And the main point is, if there's any bias in the data, or if there's any bias that is introduced in the training process, then the resulting model will be biased as well. And sometimes it is really, really hard to get rid of the bias. A few years ago, it was reported that Amazon had to kill an AI-based recruitment tool. This recruitment tool was based on historic hiring data from Amazon. And despite the fact that they, of course, got rid of obvious features, such as the gender, they still couldn't make the tool not discriminate against women. The discrimination against women in hiring in the historic data was so strong that just the mention that a person attended a school that is predominantly known to be a school for girls was enough to immediately flag the candidate as not good because of this historical bias. And this is very important because, and I would like to talk about this slide for a minute, because I think we are at a crossroads. Imagine that there's a certain amount of biased decisions that are made every day. Now let's assume we provide a society where this amount of biased decisions are taken with tools which are unbiased, which are fair. Then suddenly also those people that are biased would use a tool which is unbiased, so the amount of biased decision taken would decrease. If we, however, don't do it right and provide the world with mass of biased tools, then also those people which are not biased and did not take biased decisions so far would suddenly use tools which are biased, which would increase the amount of biased decision taken. I think this is very important because this just really shows we need to fix this problem of bias, and we need to be very much aware of it. The third ethical issue that I would like to touch upon is the question of regulation. Now, I find this question very interesting because in the past years, I used to say that it's very likely that AI development is much faster than legislation can ever be. Politics lack the necessary knowledge, and that current democratic processes are likely to never be able to keep up with this development. But I think we see a little bit of change here, maybe positive change. On one hand, it seems that AI development is not as fast as we believed a few years ago, and the hurdles are bigger than we thought. And at the same time, politics is catching up. And I really liked this headline that I found in May 2021, which was "Machines learn that Brussels writes the rules." And this was because the EU actually published a draft of how the EU thinks AI will be regulated in the future. And I think this is a very, very welcome addition, especially since the European Union also became, in many areas of the world, actually the gold standard for certain regulation, for example, data privacy regulation with the GDPR. And I think there is a chance here that Europe can also become kind of the leader in the regulation of the AI field, which I think is really something that we, from an ethical point of view, are in dire need. And this is related to another kind of big ethical problem, because AI is such a market driver. There is the threat that it will be developed where the standards are lowest. And how do we actually deal with this question? And how do we make sure that unethical tools do not find their way into our countries, into our markets, just because they have been developed somewhere else? I would like to give an example as the last example, because as it's an introduction, I cannot touch upon all ethical issues of AI. Of course, there are many more. But I found this very interesting because this has been one that I haven't added to many versions of this talk in the past. But it has become really an interesting and pressing issue. So what are AI-based autonomous weapons? Again, it's not this. It's much smaller. They're much smaller. It's actually this. So already in 2017, a video was uploaded to YouTube by an organization that is fighting autonomous weapon development. It's a video about what they call slaughter bots. Tiny drones equipped with AI technology of face recognition, person recognition, that basically can find certain people, and when they make contact, they explode and can kill these people. At the time when this video was published, it has been people thought it's ridiculous. So people published articles about this, why you shouldn't fear slaughter bots, that this is basically science fiction. I don't know if you read it in the media though. Just a couple of weeks ago, it has been reported that in the war in Libya, such drones have been proven to be used for the first time to liquidate combatants on the field. And the moment we think about autonomous weapons, then we can realize that all of the issues that I've mentioned before are combined in the issue of autonomous weapons. There is the ethical issue of agency. Is it ethical that the decision to kill humans is made by a machine based on AI? How do we make sure that there isn't considerable bias within these models that work in such autonomous weapons, assuming that we allow them? We could very well imagine here that also the development of autonomous weapons, for example, people of color would be underrepresented in the training data, and suddenly these autonomous weapons are bad at distinguishing combatants from civilians the moment they have darker skin color. The whole question about regulation, should we regulate autonomous weapons? How should we regulate them? And also the same thing about ethics shopping. What if other parts of the world do develop them? Can we still buy it? Are we kind of forced to develop our own just because other people have it? These are very, very pressing questions. And as we've seen, what people think was science fiction 4 years ago can become a pressing ethical question a few years later. And this brings me to my last point. All these questions should not be debated just by ethicists and AI experts. As with any other ethical questions, we need a broad public debate. We need everybody should actually talk about these issues, as almost everyone has a relatively informed decision, for example, opinion about questions like abortion and others. But in my experience, many people do not have a good understanding what AI is. So what we need, and I think this is an ethical issue on its own, we need much more AI literacy in the broad public so that we can debate these ethical issues. And only if we reach a certain level of public literacy can we have this debate to make sure that we end up with the AI in our societies that we actually want. Thank you very much.